Welcome, everybody. My name is Brian O'Neill. I'm the current president of IAFSM. I want to welcome you all to this talk. It's been a while, but it's good to have everybody back. I want to give a special welcome to our friends that are joining us from ACER, the Association for Crime Scene Reconstruction. Since we're doing a joint conference with them coming up in February, we extended the invitation to view this to their membership as well. So welcome. Thank you for being here, and look forward to meeting you guys, hopefully in Colorado. And with that, I want to make sure I do a shameless plug for our conference. It'll be in Westminster, Colorado from February 14th through the 18th. It is a joint conference, like I said. Very excited about this. It's something I've wanted to do for a while, is get us a joint conference with another organization to expand our knowledge base, expand our list of contacts. So it should be a lot of fun. We have our hands-on activity for this conference is going to be a mass casualty site. It will be inside of a large concert arena, so going to be something like we haven't ever done before, so it should be a lot of fun. I will also put in a plug for our basic laser scanning certification. That course is going to happen on the 13th, the day before the start of the conference. So you show up a day early, you can get that certification and then jump into the conference from there. So definitely encourage everyone to show up to that. For more information, you can go to the website, the IAFSM website. And there's also information on the Whova app is what we're using. It's going to be a lot of fun. Once you're registered and on the Whova app, you can actually start talking to people before they show up. So with that, I'd like to move on and introduce our presenters today. We have with us today Joshua Cohen and Joel Newman from Fat Pencil Studios. I'll tell you a little bit about them. Joshua Cohen earned his bachelor's degree in civil engineering at Brown University and master's degree in architecture at the University of Oregon. As a principal at Fat Pencil Studio since 2004, Joshua creates visual tools and exhibits, including timelines, maps, charts, and animation. His skill with real-time 3D modeling of crime scenes drives better collaboration between investigators, experts, and attorneys during team meetings and allows creation of interactive courtroom exhibits. Joshua has been retained as a 3D visualization expert in 100+ cases and provided sworn testimony for several of these. He has also served as a juror on several occasions, most recently acting as a foreman on a misdemeanor hit-and-run case. Joel Newman earned his master's degree in design at Pacific Northwest College of Art in 2015, focusing on design thinking and sustainability. Now in his third year as a designer at Fat Pencil Studio, Joel has developed expertise with photogrammetry and 3D visualization based on PointCloud data. He's also developed the skills needed to create dynamic components in SketchUp, including the evidence markers demonstrated in this webinar. So I've had an opportunity to see the things that Fat Pencil Studios has put out a couple different times, be it at conferences, as well as we happen to live close together as we're both in the Portland metropolitan area. And they put out a great monthly newsletter that has some really interesting tidbits of information, as well as kind of some of the things that they're working with. So I encourage you to Google Fat Pencil Studio and sign up for their monthly newsletter as well. It's quite entertaining. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Joshua and Joel. Guys, thank you for being here and look forward to hearing from you.
Thanks so much, Brian. I appreciate the invitation to speak today, and thanks for everyone who's logged in and is going to spend a little time with us talking through our workflow on crime scene modeling. And for anyone who's just learning about Fat Pencil Studio today, we are a small design firm located in Portland, and we focus almost exclusively on creating visual tools for litigation. So that's helping attorneys, investigators, and expert witnesses collaborate on both learning tools and communication tools, and ultimately exhibits for a court if things get that far. What we're going to do today is talk some more about how we build crime scene visualizations really targeted at that collaboration process. And 3D visualization can be an extremely powerful tool in an investigation process, but it's not always used or understood as far as what's possible. It's actually something that's been happening for a long time. And I would say that as early as the 1940s, a woman by the name of Frances Glessner Lee was building very detailed, what she called them nutshell studies of crime scenes. So these are sort of dollhouse-sized um, recreations of crime scenes that were based on cases, maybe not exactly to the detail, but things that she built for the purposes of education. And these were, as you can imagine, by the level of detail required, things that would take months to build, sometimes 6 months to 12 months to build one of these things. So it wasn't as much useful as an active investigation, but they were used, and they still are used today in training investigators on being observant for what to look for in a crime scene. Today, with visual tools, we have a lot more flexibility in terms of how things can be built out quickly. And Fat Pencil Studio has built out hundreds of crime scenes, sometimes based on photographs, measurements, or whatever information that we can get to develop an accurate model of a particular scene. What you're looking at on screen here is from a case that we worked on in 2009 in Portland. And it's actually perhaps the first time that I really understood how useful this kind of a tool can be for a team of investigators and attorneys. And that was because the city of Portland, who hired us for this case, was very interested in understanding what all the witnesses, and there were many for this particular incident, could see from their perspective. So we built the 3D model with the idea that it might be ultimately used in court, but we ended up using it many times with different witnesses, with the attorneys, with the risk management folks at the city of Portland, just to make sure everybody understood and was on the same page about the information that they were getting from various sources. In this case, the model is based on a total station scan that was collected by the police, as well as tape measurements that I went back and gathered by hand on specific details that were relevant to their interest. Like, for example, how many steps, what was the height of the steps, what are the heights of these walls and the fence and that sort of thing. Other cases that we've done more recently have just relied on photographs. This is a snapshot from a shooting that occurred after a house party. And you can see we have lots of detail that was collected on the scene. There wasn't a laser scan in this case, or if there was one done, we didn't get access to it right away. So this model is based solely on an aerial photograph that we can use to get the general measurements of the property, and then street level photographs that were taken by the police at the crime scene. Even if it's not accurate down to the millimeter or the centimeter like you might get with a laser scan, it's still extremely helpful to get a tool that investigators and attorneys can use to sort out exactly what things are there on the scene and what they look like from different perspectives. And here's another case where we did have a laser scan, and it allowed us to get much more detailed with the possible trajectories that a potential shooter might have used in different scenarios from different positions. So what I wanted to do is talk about the fact that there's so many more cases where we have this point cloud information that's generated by a photogrammetry flyover on a drone, or photogrammetry data from sort of street level cameras or a laser scan, and how we use it in our workflow. And then we'll get into some details about what we can add into that in terms of human figures and configurable evidence markers and that sort of thing. And what we're going to do to talk about that is look at a case study, which I presented to this group before. But for anyone who hadn't seen that presentation, the basic gist of the story is that you've got some drug dealing going on between the owners of this house and a gentleman who comes to the house in kind of a home invasion style situation. He had sent money to get drugs delivered by mail. One shipment got shorted. The next shipment didn't even show up at all. And the gentleman who was the dealer was not communicating. So he gets on a bus, comes to town, and is basically going to come to this house and try to get either money or the drugs that he purchased. And then he comes in with another gentleman, both have weapons. The end result is that one of the owners of the home rushes him and then a shooting occurs, and exactly how that shooting occurs is what's in dispute in the case. There's a aggravated murder charge, and that was, based in part on testimony of one eyewitness who said that he saw the shooter sort of square up and aim and fire at the gentleman in orange here. And one of the things we needed to understand for the case is that report credible based on where the eyewitness was sitting. So what I'm going to do now is turn it over to Joel to talk a little bit about why, how and why we build these models, and just sort of by way of introduction, a model like this, where you see a little bit less detail than you would see in a laser scan, can be very helpful, not only in terms of focusing the attention of the group of investigators and attorneys on the things that are most important for their narrative, and then as well, it can be easier to work in real time to talk through the issues during either a Zoom meeting or in a conference room or whatever, much easier than it would be to try to do the same type of investigation using exclusively PointCloud tools. So what I'm going to ask people to do as we're going through this is, if you see something you're interested in talking some more about, go ahead and just type your questions right into the chat window. And I may also call on some folks who've done a little bit of this work before to chime in with specific feedback. But yeah, if you've got questions, don't hesitate to just type something into the chat, and I can monitor that, and we can get to those questions along the way, and make this more of an interactive discussion. So with that, Joel, do you want to take over?
Yeah, and can you hear me?
Yeah, sounds good.
Okay, I'm going to share my screen here and want to talk through the process a little bit. Where is my screen? Okay, so first I want to share this is the model that Joshua pulled those slides from, and our task for a lot of cases is to make something like this, where it's simple enough that we can share it over Zoom, but it's accurate to the actual house. And then we have figures here, we can put weapons or vehicles, whatever we need, into the model, and then move people around in real time based on what witnesses are telling us, or to test a theory of the case. But where we start with these is usually with a laser scan, at least more and more frequently lately. And this is the laser scan for this case. It's been processed somewhat already. The scans have been registered together and unified. And we typically use Autodesk Recap for that process. There are other tools, but this has worked pretty well for us. So we end up with a scan. There's a lot of detail here. We can get in and read the numbers on these evidence markers, at least most of them. But as far as being able to interact with this, Recap leaves us a little bit short. So one of the ways that we've extracted data from this is just by taking hand measurements, not unlike a tape measure. So in this case, for instance, the width of the hallway became important. So we can put a measurement on here, pull it over to the other side of the hallway, and we've got something like 3'1", 3'1 1/8" there. So especially for geometric objects, that works fine. We can go through the house, take measurements on anything we need to reference, and build a simplified SketchUp model of the house. And one place that breaks down is objects with organic shapes or complicated angles, where we need maybe just a little bit more detail. So we've got a number of ways of solving that. And one of them that we've been using somewhat frequently is taking small pieces of the point cloud and importing them straight into SketchUp. So this is processed through a SketchUp plugin called SketchUp PointCloud Importers. And it doesn't want to deal with a whole lot of points, but in this case, we've got a piece of a model that's very important. This is a trajectory rod you can kind of see sticking out of an object here. And we grabbed a snippet of the point cloud that includes enough detail. And this actually does not belong to the hallway shooting case. This is a different one. But in this case, we've got enough to reference the location of the snippet. We've got a piece of the floor here and a box spring and a mattress. And that lets us locate the point cloud in our SketchUp model. And then we can draw directly onto these points, come up with the trajectory that was actually marked at the crime scene, and then we can extend this out in space. And that's going to be a lot more accurate than taking measurements in recap and then trying to translate those into SketchUp. So that works well if there's a couple details that we need to be accurate about, but otherwise we're just drawing a basic context model. Now, once in a while, we end up needing to draw something that is quite a lot more accurate. And one of the ways that we've been working on for this is meshing the point cloud. There's a couple tools for that. Some of them are paid, some of them are free. We've tested Autodesk Recaps meshing service. That was something that was provided in the desktop version of the app for a while, and then they took it out, and now they've just added a cloud-based meshing service that we haven't actually had a chance to try yet. Lately, we've been using a free piece of software called MeshLab for this. And here's a sample of that case's point cloud simplified, then meshed MeshLab to a level where it's a small enough file that we can actually import it directly into SketchUp as an OBJ file and have the whole house here to work with. And this is a process that I think we're still tinkering with, and it doesn't always get us what we need, but the possibilities are interesting. And so I'm not going to dive too far into the technical details, although I'd be happy to answer any questions about how we've done this if you have them. But the one point here is the level of detail. First, the texture is a little bit strange, and we can probably fix that. But again, there's a lot of trial and error in that process. We end up with something that's a little nicer to look at if we just turn the textures off. You can see there's a good deal of detail here, especially on the flat, hard surfaces, the walls and floors. Some of the things like there's clothing or some drapes or something piled on the floor there. This is a TV that has a mirrored surface and it didn't work nearly as well. So it's a little bit hit or miss. And then as far as going back to the detail that's in the original point cloud, we know there's some evidence markers here that we can read, or almost read in the point cloud data in a recap, and they're basically gone here. So this might be what we need in some situations. In this situation, maybe not as much. And then the last method of working with point cloud data that I want to spend a little bit of time with is a Trimble produced plugin called Scan Essentials. And this is maybe what we're most excited about right now, although we haven't actually used this on a real case yet. We're fairly new to it, but this is a way of importing the point cloud directly into SketchUp. Turn off the So previously this wasn't possible, but right now we've got the point cloud data. It comes in at the proper scale. It's we've actually simplified it once from the recap project, but I'm not sure we needed to. Most of the details here. And a nice thing about it is you can actually snap SketchUp lines straight to the point cloud here and draw. You can start drawing in lines for walls, whatever we want to do. So I've actually made a start here. So this is SketchUp geometry, the 3D model that we've drawn straight over the walls. And if I toggle the point cloud off, you can see where we're at with it. And that's a way for us to extract the details we want, simplify the model, but we can turn the model back, or the point cloud, excuse me, turn the point cloud back on whenever we want and have all that detail there as a reference. So it opens up a new way for us to work. It's pretty exciting. So I just wanted to spend a minute giving a demonstration of how we can model straight over the top of here. The Scan Essentials plugin has a few controls that are really useful here. One of them is a selector here for snapping geometry to the point cloud itself, or ignoring the point cloud and snapping geometry to the SketchUp model. Another set of features here is a couple different transparency modes, and you can toggle between them to sort of get the right layering of point cloud versus SketchUp geometry that you want. That looks nice here. So now I've got a back wall of this kitchen drawn here. The face is reversed. But with the reference to the point cloud itself, I can draw this opening in, delete that out. And now I can use the push-pull tool and extrude the wall out, snap it to the back side of that wall. And pretty quickly, oops. End up with something that is both simple enough for us to use and share with our clients, and also accurate to the point cloud. Another way we can work with this is we can add the same figures and weapons, whatever we need, from the, well, we can add figures in here, the same ones we shared in the slides Joshua presented. We can drop in here and use just the point cloud in a similar way as the model, as a way of testing theories of the case, or simulating what witnesses may have seen or not been able to see. And so here's the key witness here. View down the hallway, we can zoom into there and see that a partial view may not have been able to see some key things happening.
And Joel, let me jump in for a minute here and say this is one of the key issues I think that we try to get to in any case, is to be able to test ideas and theories as early as possible in the process. I feel like sometimes there's a tendency among experts and investigators to think, we have to figure everything out before we make exhibits. But this process allows everyone to sort of collaborate and be on the same page and give input and see kind of what's being found out in a way that there's not as many misunderstandings, and also an opportunity to make progress more quickly. You can rule out certain things. You can find, maybe some alternatives that you might not have expected by using the model in this way. And I know you've got a couple more things to demonstrate, but I wanted to see if I could quickly ask Matt Nodell if he's still on. Are you there, Matt?
Yeah, I'm here, Joshua.
Yeah, we've done a few cases together where you were on acting as investigator and working, with a couple different attorneys. So you were acting as a forensic expert and ballistics expert, where we had maybe an attorney and investigator on the line as well, and doing some of this 3D modeling. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit just about what it looks from your end as far as the utility of approaching a case in that way versus, the more traditional make a report, send it in and then try to work from there.
Yeah, so in my approach from the forensic side, and recently I've been able to dabble in some 3D stuff as 3D becomes more and more prevalent in scenes. But primarily my expertise is in the analysis of things like bullet path analysis or bullet impact sites. And so what's useful is I can spend my time documenting and examining, say, a photograph of a bullet hole. I often work older cases that come my way where I was not the primary crime scene responder. So I haven't ever been to this scene except for either the 3D data and the photographs that go along with it. So I can spend my time evaluating the photographs, what we can say from this, concurrently while somebody like Joshua or Joel at Fat Pencil is making this diagram, and they say, ultimately we get together and they say, all right, what do you think about bullet hole A? It's right here in the hall or in the bed or wherever. And I can then add my position and I can say, well, I think that angle is too far over. I think we need to move it based on the bullet hole. Looks like it's a tumbling bullet. And maybe you need to model a ricochet mark in front of it. And so in real time, we're getting the analysis part that I can support forensically. They're able to model that. We can do that even with attorneys online so that they can begin to see what they're dealing with and what the limits and expectations of the physical evidence are going to be. And we've done that on a number of projects where I can, in real time, while working online with these guys, help position and say, I think that guy's too far down the hall for where the bullet struck or something like that. So it's worked out very well from that perspective.
Excellent. Thank you, Matt. And I want to also, remind people, if you've got any questions about sort of how this is working and capabilities of these different approaches, go ahead and drop them in the chat and we can answer those as we go along. But in the meantime, Joel, do you want to get back into demonstrating some additional things that we can add into the model in terms of the evidence markers and configuring those?
Yeah.
Maybe furniture, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, so I'm going to turn the point cloud off for a sec. And so this is the completely simplified. There's no point cloud here. We've used it as a reference and modeled in SketchUp all these pieces of furniture. And I can, in this case, just copy them into the other model. Should come in at the right place. Yeah, there we go.
And while you're doing that, I just want to point out, like, a lot of times we are making judgments that, like this piece of furniture that the green person is sitting in is not an exact replica of what you see in the point cloud. To get exact replicas of each furniture would be time consuming and it would really slow the model down as far as the complexity that would be required. But there is an important part of that, the accuracy is, where is the cushion that he's sitting on and getting that in the right spot. And I think that's what you're going to demonstrate now, Joel, is like how you can zoom in and verify that you've got the chair in the right location so that, we're having an accurate picture of where he was sitting.
Yeah, so like Joshua said, we can see that this chair doesn't have the right shape on the back, for instance, but the back cushion is pretty close. And then over here, the seat cushion in the front of the chair, which are the keys in this case. I'm not sure what you're able to see via Zoom, but the alignment's actually very good here. And
I can see the point cloud overlaid the model of the chair.
yeah, great. And then if we need to, we can move things around within SketchUp until we have the accuracy that we need. Another tool that we've been working on for facilitating these kinds of working sessions that we can facilitate with the 3D model is a set of evidence markers. So we can add these into the scene. And use that to keep track of information. So these are dynamic components, if you're familiar with SketchUp. So with this one, I can change this to match the actual number.
And Joel, just in case there's people that are trying to follow along with this, on their end, or if they're watching the recording later and have got the SketchUp open and the dynamic components, can you just kind of explain where to get to? How do you get to this component options menu? And it's a little small on screen, so just sort of narrate what you're doing as you do it.
Sure. So if you download the components, or if you bring them in from the SketchUp 3D warehouse, you can insert them into the model via the components window. So over here on the right side of my screen, we've got two versions here. A little triangle stand-up marker and a flat placard. So you can click on either of those and then just drag them into your scene and place them wherever.
And the flat placard, they stick to whatever surface you put them on.
That's right. And then once we have them placed, you can open the component options dialog. That's also going to be in the window menu. And then if you click on one of these, that gives you options for changing the color here, changing the number. It'll accept multiple digits. This is number 23. You can do that. And you can also enter a description here. We call that a stain on carpet. A lot of times we use the description field to reference image number. If we have a set of photos that go with the crime scene, we can collect a bunch of images that show this evidence marker or the evidence that it's calling out, and have those ready to refer to. And this has saved us a lot of time in switching back and forth between a folder full of photos and the SketchUp model. We know right where to look. The other thing you can do is with the SketchUp's Interact tool, it's going to be in the Tools menu unless you've added it to your toolbar. You can click on this and you get a little pop-up here that tells you the description. In this case, it's stain on carpet. So this has been a really helpful way for us to be able to facilitate a discussion with investigators or with attorneys where we can keep track of information visually and have it ready to refer to when it becomes important to the discussion.
So Samantha Spencer is asking, could you add results from testing to these markers, like say serology or DNA results? I think you could add anything you want as far as text description. And then one of the things that we've thought about, and there's no easy way to do it right now, but we're toying with what maybe might be possible inside of SketchUp's development environment. They have an API that allows for use of Ruby on Rails language to develop customized plugins. It would be nice if we could not just put text descriptions, but also have a direct link to images or other media that are relevant to these markers. Like for example, pressing the Interact tool, maybe it brings up a little window with a title and text description, but also a little light box full of images that you could click right there instead of having to switch over between SketchUp and and another folder of images. So we've talked about that. We don't have that implemented, but it's something that we are thinking about. But in terms of your question that Matt had, how many characters are you allowed? What would you say, Joel? It seems like there's not any specific limit, right?
I think that's right. It's a good question. I think what's going to happen here is it kind of starts to break the interface before it's actually limited. So here it'll never break lines, it looks like, so that you end up with a horizontal scroll bar in the component options window.
Got it.
But
so there's no easy way to make that a text box instead of just a text input field. But at least you can copy and paste stuff into there, and it would show up in the dialog box when you click it.
Yeah. So back to Samantha's question, I think you could drop in any amount of text there, but it's probably best suited for referencing the name of a document or something rather than the information itself.
Excellent. We can answer more questions about these, but while we're waiting for any others to come in, Joel, do you mind showing real quick how the people can be posed in real time?
Yeah. Anybody that's worked with us before has probably seen these guys. But we have a set of figures here that are posable, and they're pretty low detail. They always have the same physique, for example, and no clothes. But that's both an advantage and a limitation. I think it stops us from being too specific about details that are very difficult to model, and it allows us to drop these people in and fairly quickly change the poses to match whatever investigators or witnesses are telling us. So you end up with these handles, and we can use SketchUp's rotate tool to move each joint around.
And one of the ways that this is useful is if we are either meeting with a witness and trying to get more detailed information from them, or just talking through scenarios, it's nice to be able to, rather than say, could you rotate that 20 degrees and then come back and show me a new image tomorrow? Just do it right then and say, is that far enough? Does that look right? There's a lot of ways to handle human figures and models. I know when we've worked with Matt Nodell, he has a program called Poser. And this is the Windows version working. So Matt has a program called Poser that allows not just sort of generic human figures, but actually creation of more specific anatomical features and some clothing, and it has the ability to create what's called rigged models, so you can have more careful and detailed control over all the different joints. And then it can export a posed figure that can be imported into SketchUp. But once it's out of Poser, we don't have in SketchUp this, the ability to manipulate it in real time. There's other tools that we've tested, sort of open source tools, because Poser is a program you have to buy, but there are open source tools that will create human figures of varying shapes and sizes, allow for manipulation of the rigged joints. That's like we use a program called Blender for that. And then those things could be imported into SketchUp as well. But again, once they're in SketchUp from those other programs, they can't be moved in real time. So we often rely on these kind of low detail generic figures because they're easy to move in real time. We could always do something a little bit more detailed later if we need to, but we often find it's better to keep the focus away from what somebody was wearing or how much they weighed. Even if the attorneys might ask for that, it's probably not the key issue. It's going to be more about what could they see, what could they have shot at, and having a generic human figure in a spot at a particular pose is pretty helpful for eliciting details about those questions. Anything else, Joel, that you wanted to get in before we, ask for additional discussion or start to wrap up?
No, I think that's all I had to share.
Okay. So let me open it up to see if anyone else online has particular questions about how the software works. I know we might have a couple folks that work for Trimble with us on the line here that might be able to answer some details about use of this particular software. It's a little bit of an upgrade from the standard Pro version to get these features included, but it can be really, really helpful in terms of speeding up the workflow. There are a couple other ways to get PointCloud information into SketchUp, and I will say that in case you are wondering about how to find these things, I'm going to put together a follow-up email to send out to attendees, and we can have it available for download on the website as well, with links to some of these different programs that we've used and articles that we've written about them, so that you'll be able to access that and not have to worry about missing something. But with that in mind, does anyone else have any questions either about point clouds in SketchUp or how to use the evidence markers or different things that we've been showing here?
Joshua, it's Brian. I had a question less about the software, more just kind of a general thought or opinion. You were talking about how your chair model, for instance, was close. I know in a world where we've got scanners that have accuracy of plus or minus 1 millimeter, how close is close enough? And I know that's kind of dependent case by case, but what are your thoughts on what is close enough when we're talking about making models?
So this is a really important question, because I feel like sometimes people get hung up on everything has to be precise and as accurate as possible. And I think when you're collecting a scan of a crime scene, absolutely, you want to get the most accurate information you can using the equipment you have. But when you're trying to think about how to develop your strategy for a case, you can get bogged down in all that detail. And so I think what I often try to do with the folks I'm working with, and primarily, in the attorneys, experts, and investigators, is ask, what questions do you need to answer? So in this particular case, it was, what could the witness see? Well, there are some things that are really important to getting an answer to that, where accuracy matters a lot. So things like, how wide is the hallway? Where is the corner of the hallway? Where is that corner in relation to the chair? Where could he possibly have been sitting? And the answer is different if the chair is there where Joel moved it to, than if it was back where it was originally. And so it matters quite a bit that we get those things right. And so, if you were to measure the hallway width in this model, you'd find it's 3'1" and 1/8. That's exactly what we found in the point cloud. And and we were having the point cloud in SketchUp to really test to make sure we have that corner of the hallway wall in the right place and the chair in the right place. That's really important. And then in terms of how the green person could have been sitting, like we want to be able to see, like, what if he was leaning forward? And that's one of the things that we did in the actual exhibits is, what if he was sitting straight up? What if he was leaning forward and kind of craning his neck to see around? So those are all things we can test in this model. But it probably didn't matter exactly where the TV was or and that kind of stuff. So I think that in every case we work on, it's always going to be asking that question: is the accuracy that we have appropriate for answering the question that you want to know? And sometimes the answer is no, it's not. We don't really have enough accuracy to make, to give that opinion or to make that conclusion. And it's really important to get that sorted at as early as possible, so you can have that be part of the strategy for the case. And then, Brian, you're also asking about a quick walkthrough on importing the point clouds. I think that maybe the appropriate thing is to talk quickly about importing the point clouds into Scan Essentials by Trimble, because there's so many other programs that we deal with point clouds that probably don't have enough time to work through all that. But Joel, do you want to say anything quickly about importing the point clouds into Scan Essentials?
Yeah, it's quite simple. The process is you can open a point cloud. Whoa, looks like I just got kicked off our free trial. So what you need to get started with is a unified point cloud. So a lot of the times, for instance, this model is assembled from 8 or 10 individual scans. And we use Recap to unify those into one point cloud. And then we can export that. In this case, we used the E57 format. I think there's a couple of others that Trimble Scan Essentials can work with. And then you can open it here. It'll ask you to save it. The Trimble Scan Essentials wants to use an RWP format. So it will do the conversion for you and then open the point cloud in SketchUp. And it comes in with whatever coordinate system you set up. So there's a tool here for moving the point cloud, another one for rotating it. So if you've got a pre-existing model or you need to change the orientation of the point cloud, those are your tools for doing that. And then after that, that's it. You can start modeling over the top of it or dropping figures or furniture or other objects into it. There's also a set of tools here for clipping the point cloud. So if you only want to look at a piece of it, I found it more useful to do the clipping in Recap and bring in only the piece that you're interested in. In the example I was showing, I used Recap to cut the roof off of the model so that we're only looking at the walls. You could do that in SketchUp as well.
And I wanted to point out, we use Autodesk Recap because it's affordable and it can operate on a variety of different point cloud information, point cloud formats. But I think a lot of folks who are members of IFSM or Acer will have access to Faro scanners and Faro Scene or Leica scanners, and I'm sort of blanking on the various software names, but every different scanner manufacturer has their own sort of dedicated proprietary software for operating and registering point clouds. And I think all those different software can export the E57 format. So if you have gathered your these point clouds and registered them in Faro Scene, you could then export an E57 file that would drop straight into SketchUp, the same way as we're talking about registering and scans in Recap and exporting as E57. Yasir is asking a question about building animations for cases, and could you speak to how you take the SketchUp model and animate it? And I'll touch on that briefly and also include an article I wrote a little while back about animation versus simulation, which I think answers some important questions about admissibility. But in general, SketchUp is not a program that was designed to do sort of movie making style animation, in the sense that, you know, there are some limited tools available out of the box to animate camera angles. So for example, I could create 2 different scenes, and there are in fact different scenes in this model, and maybe Joel can click through them while we're talking. And you know, you can, you know, both create different snapshots, which is what we often do, to explain how an event progressed over time. So we might say, well, there was some people in the living room, and then they went down the hallway, and that's when the shots were fired. And then we can also define different camera angles, and you can see a kind of a jerky animation here between different camera angles. That would be a nice smooth animation on screen on your own computer if you're working through this, and also you can export those camera moves. That can be really helpful to explain to people, you know, this is, you know, what this place looks like. You know, jumping between different camera angles can be a little bit hard to understand, but having the motion in between makes it much easier to understand the context and the camera moves. So that's some of the things that we do in SketchUp. There's also some plugins that allow for limited object animation, in terms of like having objects move around on screen, but it's not really a program that was designed for a lot of detailed object animation, and it certainly was not designed for moving people around or having people running around and jumping around. So we don't have any capability inside of SketchUp as far as having people walk around. And I would argue that in most cases that's actually really problematic, because you rarely know unless you have, for example, a really good video footage of exactly what somebody was doing. You rarely know exactly how they move their body. And so trying to make that up could cause real problems for foundational purposes. But there are other software that does do sort of human animation. And some of the things that we've played around with a little bit is what can we do in software packages like Blender or even Unreal Engine for real-time animation of human figures. But we haven't used it too much in court cases for those reasons I mentioned about admissibility of an animation of human figures. So that's a quick answer, but always happy to chime in more if people have more detailed questions about that. And Ed B is asking, can you superimpose a still image over the animated image and have control over the opacity of each display? Joel, do you want to take that one? That's something that you do a lot.
Yeah, but first I wanted to add to your point, Joshua, we can actually do something like animation here. And what we've got in terms of that is people pose at different places. So that saves us the trouble of trying to figure out how someone walked or how fast or how slow, but we can kind of tell the story one frame at a time.
And I'm glad you brought that up, because oftentimes if an attorney asks for an animation, what they're really talking about is even just a little bit of movement between scenes, like this kind of stop action animation. They're not always talking about, a full frame, 30 frames per second of motion. They might just be like, hey, can we see 5 different states that explains what happens? And so that is something that you can definitely do by having sequential poses.
And that way we can work with an expert and kind of fine tune each of these poses using whatever evidence we have. If we've got something that's defensible for why we have people in certain places, we can do that without having to argue about their body language as they move or anything that would come with a full motion animation.
Right, and sometimes we do have experts that are able to provide an opinion about body position based on forensic evidence, based on injuries, or witnesses that just want to be able to explain their recollection in more detail, and we can use this tool to do that.
Now to jump to the still image over the animated image, that is something we do a lot, and SketchUp has a couple tools for it. The one we use most often is a feature of the styles palette called a watermark, and I apologize, I don't have anything to demonstrate with that here, but you can, so I'm not sure if you're able to see my tool palettes at all. I know they're small, but you can add a watermark to a style, and that will give you a dialog box to select an image from your computer. A lot of times we do this with a single image from a security camera. And if we have a point cloud, or we can otherwise locate the camera in the model, then we can set up a simulated view from that spot, overlay an image from the camera. And that's a useful tool for locating the exact position of a person at a time or a vehicle. And we can do that with a few frames and try to estimate the speed of something. We can do that to try to analyze what would have been visible from a camera if the footage had been captured, for instance, in cases where we have investigators are telling us that there wasn't anything to see on that camera, so they're not going to give us the footage.
And as far as the image overlays, there's a little in that styles window. Once you brought an image in, there's a dialog box you can bring up to drag between 100% image and 100% model, or anywhere in between. And that's really, I've used that quite a bit, even in courtroom testimony, where we need to explain what's the basis for this reverse projection photogrammetry process, where we're putting a person or a vehicle in a 3D model based on what appeared in security camera footage. And if we know that location of that footage, and sometimes we do know it quite accurately, we can use that as a starting point to get a match between the camera image and the model image. Once they're at the same perspective, it allows us to put things into the model based on where they appear in that image. And being able to drag back and forth between the two is really helpful in, especially for a layperson to understand what's actually happening, because it looks like it makes sense. And once people understand from seeing it, it's easier to sort of follow along with what the conclusions are, as opposed to sort of scratching their head about why are they saying this is true? I don't understand how they did it. Yeah, so that's one thing I would say that I really value about SketchUp as a 3D modeling tool. Is it's so easy and intuitive to show people what you're doing. And maybe that's a good point for me to summarize. Just thinking back to the first time I went to an Acer conference, which was back in Tacoma, I think. After being real impressed by some of the presentations of the level of detail people were able to capture with laser scans in various situations, we had a lunch and I asked some of the investigators what the attorneys are doing with this, and their response was, well, the DAs don't often really know what to do with it, and so they might put a lot of work into a scene and have great information, but then there's a challenge in terms of how to use it in a case. And I expect that since then people have figured out little ways to do more, but I think that there's a huge opportunity in leveraging that information more than most people already are. And so, yeah, I encourage you to in your organizations to find ways to not just have that point cloud live on somebody's fancy computer that with proprietary software, but bring it into a tool that you can use interactively with the different members of the team. With SketchUp, once these little models are built, you can even open them on the free viewer, so you don't have to have it be just the person that has the license that's looking at this. You can distribute it throughout your team if they want to look at it on their own, or you can host it on a Zoom meeting pretty easily, or in a conference room. So it's a great way to work, and we've been really happy to do that. Ed B is asking, what are the 3D camera systems that are supported by the SketchUp software? I'm not sure exactly how to answer that. Do you have a thought on that, Joel? What do you mean by 3D camera systems? Is that maybe like what different things can you configure the virtual camera as far as field of view?
So I run a couple different cameras. I have the Leica camera. I know agencies have Faro systems. I even run a Matterport system, and I know that some people will use their Android phones to do some captures of data. So I guess maybe the better question would be, what systems and or data formats would be supported by the software? In other words, what can I bring in and utilize for the software, to make those SketchUps and the data sort of shake hands with each other?
So if you're talking about point cloud data that's generated, either from a Matterport or like a scan or photogrammetry running off Android phones or whatnot, that anything that's in an E57 format and maybe a couple others that I'm not sure about would be able to be imported as a point cloud. But if you're talking about images that come out of those devices and bringing that in as an overlay, then it's just a matter of figuring out, can you get the camera specs for the device that created that image? So we often will look at an image and check the metadata and say, okay, what device created this? Did it report in the metadata what the focal length and the lens size of? And those are things you can configure using a plugin called Advanced Camera Tools. But we don't always have that information. And if we don't, then our next step would be to just put the image in there and then start adjusting the focal length and an exact lens position of the virtual camera in SketchUp until we get as close a match as possible. And it's not a perfect system. I mean, there's certainly more that could be done with that, but it does usually get us pretty close to where we need to be to have some useful conclusions for the case. And we're at 11:02, so I think we should probably wrap up. But what I will say is that I'm very happy to entertain additional questions if anybody wants to reach out. And I want to thank you all for an excellent set of questions and your attention today. So I'll be sending out a follow-up email and Kathy can broadcast that to everybody. And it'll have contact info, so you can certainly get in touch with us if you want. Anything else to add, Brian or Kathy, before we wrap up?
Thank you very much, guys. That was very informative. I do want to encourage people again to sign up for the conference. Again, you can find that at the IFSM webpage. And I'm sure Acer has it on their webpage as well, since it is a joint conference. But February 14th to the 18th in Denver, it should be a very good time. So I look forward to seeing everybody there, and it'll be nice to get out of the house and out of town and get back to doing conferences again.